patient's own sinus, the pacemaker's lower rate. So both atrium is paced and there's no AV conduction, complete heart block. So both atrium is getting paced and also the ventricle is getting paced. So you call this atrial paced, ventricular paced rhythm. So a dual chamber pacemaker can function in the following 4 setups: ASVS, ASVP, APVS, or APVP, depending on whether the patient's sinus rate is lower or more than the pacemaker's lower rate, and depending on the intactness of the patient's AV conduction system. So based on all the permutations and combinations, a dual chamber pacemaker can function in all these 4 manners. So this is an example of an atrial paced, ventricular sensed rhythm. This patient has a dual chamber pacemaker. So you see a spike here, a P wave here, and an intrinsically conducted QRS complex. So APVS rhythm. Here you see there is intrinsic P waves followed by paced QRS complex. You use the term atrial sensed ventricular paced rhythm. The last is atrial sensed ventricular paced rhythm, as you can see here. When during the course of recording this ECG, the patient's sinus rate dipped below that of the pacemaker's lower rate, you see that there is both atrial pacing as well as ventricular pacing. So these ECGs highlight the ways in which a dual chamber pacemaker can function and how you interpret the ECG in a patient with a dual chamber pacemaker. ECG patterns may not necessarily be due to pacemaker malfunctions. Dr. Jaishankar, you tell me when I am reaching 20 minutes, okay? Dr. Jaishankar? Can you, Dr. Murali, can you hear me? I hope I'm audible and my slides are seen. So
yes, sir. Your slide are visible, sir.
Okay. So when I am reaching 20 minutes, please alert me so that I'll stop immediately. Okay, please, because I don't want to overstep my time. At the end of 20 minutes, please let me know. So ECG patterns may not necessarily be due to pacemaker malfunctions. Sometimes what appears like a malfunction may actually be expected pacemaker function, as you can see in this example. This is a patient with a dual chamber pacemaker, and the upper tracking rate has been kept as 120. In the interest of time, we will not be able to discuss all those finer aspects as what is upper tracking rate. To make it short, I will tell you that the upper tracking rate is the maximum rate at which there can be ventricular pacing in response to atrial sensing. Meaning, when let us say the upper tracking rate is 120, means if the sinus tachycardia is more than 120 per minute, the ventricular pacing will not be more than 120. In other words, 120 is the limit to which the ventricle can get paced in response to sensed atrial activity. So in this example, there is sinus tachycardia at the rate of 130 per minute. But the patient has a dual chamber pacemaker where the upper tracking rate has been kept as 120. So the sinus rate has exceeded the upper tracking rate of the permanent pacemaker. And so you see something like group beating of twos. So this is PR interval. This PR interval is longer and this P wave is not resulting in ventricular pacing. This PR interval is shorter, this PR interval is longer, and this P wave is not tracked and the ventricle is not pacing in response to this simply because the sinus rate has exceeded the upper tracking rate of the dual chamber pacemaker. So you see what is called a 3:2 Wenckebach kind of ventricular pacing sequence. This is expected normal function. Seeing this, you should not think that there is a malfunction in the pacemaker. It is expected normal function. That's what I wanted you to understand. So here is a ECG of a patient who has sinus node dysfunction, who has an atrial based pacemaker, AAI pacemaker, programmed at the rate of 75 per minute. But you see long gaps here. There is a long gap here. There is a long gap here. But if you look at it more carefully in the rhythm strip, there is a pacing spike here, followed by a P wave. Pacing spike, followed by a P wave. And that sequence religiously continues throughout the entire extent of this ECG recording. Even in that long gap that you see here, there is a spike, followed by a P wave. So the atrial pacemaker is doing its job absolutely normally. But why this gap has happened is because this patient has developed over the course of the disease some defect in the AV nodal conduction or atrioventricular conduction. So the atrium is getting paced and the atrium is getting captured, but the AV conduction system is not allowing the P wave to get conducted to the QRS complex because this is a single chamber pacemaker. So the single chamber pacemaker is doing its job normally. So this is not a pacemaker malfunction. The patient has developed an AV nodal conduction delay. So this patient needs an upgrade of this pacemaker to a dual chamber pacing system. So again, this is just to say that what appears abnormal in this ECG is actually not abnormal pacemaker function. There is indeed an abnormality. The abnormality is in the patient's AV conduction system and not in the permanent pacemaker. That's what I wanted you to understand. And this is an ECG of a patient with a VVI pacemaker where something called hysteresis has been programmed on at 40, meaning though the pacing rate is 60, the pacemaker will function only if the patient's rate will drop to less than 40. This is just to make the intrinsic rhythm as far as possible to activate the heart. Let us rely less on the pacemaker. That is the concept. So here, the pacemaker was programmed at 60 VVI, but hysteresis was programmed at 40, meaning when the rate comes to 40 or less than 40, the pacemaker will function at 60. To the contrary, if the patient has a rate of 50, the pacemaker will not work. This is a normal function. So here there is a ventricular pacing at 40 per, there is a ventricular rhythm at 40 per minute. The pacemaker is not functioning because hysteresis is on. So this is not a defective pacemaker system. It is something to do with the way we have programmed the pacemaker. The same patient, after turning off the hysteresis, you can see that the pacemaker is functioning normally at 60 per minute. So this is again not a pacemaker malfunction. This is this is just to say that there's something called managed ventricular pacing in some pacemakers. This is a dual chamber pacemaker patient wherein you want a less amount of RV pacing to take place. You want to minimize RV pacing. So you have a program called AAI pacemaker, which will shift to the dual chamber pacing should there be a problem in AV conduction. So what is happening here is there is an atrial pacing here. At 400 milliseconds delay, there is an intrinsic QRS. So this is managed ventricular pacing. It's functioning in the AAI mode. What happens here is there is an atrial ectopic here. And this atrial ectopic falls in the refractory period of the pacemaker. So it is not triggering a ventricular pacing. And this long gap has resulted in a backup ventricular pacing. So this is again not an abnormal pacing function. It is a normal pacing function. The pacemaker shifts between AAI pacemaker to a ventricular based pacing here because of the long gap without QRS complex. So you should know modern day pacemakers functions perfectly well before you venture into identifying whether the pacemaker is functioning normally or abnormally on the basis of your ECG. ECG also gives a clue to the why. It also gives you the answer to the question, why did this patient have a pacemaker in the first place? Why did the patient even have a pacemaker? That question also can be understood on the basis of the ECG. If you look at this particular case example, there is a spike followed by QRS. You look at this, every spike is followed by a QRS. So obviously it is a ventricular pacing which is happening. So this patient has a VVI pacemaker. But what is the indication? You see there are nice P waves here. And none of the P waves are getting conducted. This P wave should have conducted. At this P wave, we don't expect it to be conducted because it is in the refractory period. But this P wave would have conducted. I just want you to understand that there are good P waves interspersed between the ventricular paced rhythm, and this is likely to be a case of AV block. This is very important because if you look at this particular, this is fine. But if you look at this example, this is a patient who came to us very recently, let us say. This is also a VVI pacemaker. But unlike the previous ECGs that we saw, there is no good P waves between the ventricular paced rhythm. That is because this is atrial fibrillation. Unlike this example where you see nice P waves here you don't see good P waves. This is fibrillation. And unlike the usual atrial fibrillation where you have irregular RR intervals, you will have regular RR intervals because of the ventricular pacing. So you should open your eyes and see what is the atrial rhythm, because if this patient, let's say, has a very high CHADS-VASc score with diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, etc. So this patient has a high risk of stroke. So by putting a ventricular pacemaker, the RR intervals will be regular. You'll miss the diagnosis of underlying atrial fibrillation, and this patient can have a cardioembolic stroke later on. So this becomes an indication for anticoagulating the patient. So the underlying rhythm is also very important when you interpret a pacemaker patient with ECG like this. The ECG gives a clue about the chamber pace, which I've already covered. If there's a spike followed by a P wave, like in this example, it's an atrial pacing. If the spike is followed by QRS, it's ventricular pacing. If there is atrial sensed ventricular pacing, there is, for every P wave, you have a spike with a fixed AV interval. Obviously, it cannot be a VVI pacemaker. A VVI pacemaker has nothing to do with the preceding atrial activity, because it will be completely AV dissociation in a VVI pacemaker. Here, there is AV association. So a ventricular pacemaker, which is in response to the P wave with fixed AV delay, that means there is atrial sensing happening. So it cannot be a VVI pacemaker. So this is an example of a dual chamber pacemaker. Sometimes the pacing spikes can be very inconspicuous. One look at this ECG, you may think that this is a normal rhythm. So you should always be very careful. You should look at all the 12 leads very meticulously. I've just blown up this particular ECG. If you look at lead 3, you see something very sharp here. With bipolar pacing, the pacing spikes can be very, very diminutive. Here, if at all, some leads will show it is lead 1 here, there's a tiny spike there, and lead 3 also, there's a spike here. So sometimes the pacing spikes can be very inconspicuous. So you should open your eyes and look at all the 12 leads very carefully. Search for a lead where the spikes are seen very much better, and don't look at a lead where the spikes are not seen. So always you should look at all the 12 leads carefully, which is the classical teaching for any ECG for that matter. Look at the ECG in totality and not look at one particular lead and make mistakes. So here lead 1, lead AVL, and lead 3 have diminutive pacing spikes. So pacing spikes may not necessarily be very evident, particularly with bipolar pacing. The value of ECG with magnet application. When you keep a magnet on the pacemaker site, like here, the sensing function of the pacemaker is suspended, meaning AAI pacemaker, during the time you keep the magnet, will go into a AOO mode. Only the atrium is paced, there is no sensing function. A VVI pacemaker will become VOO, a dual chamber pacemaker will become DOO. That is the value of keeping a magnet. So there is an over sensing resulting in inhibition of pacing function. I'm sure Dr. Jaishankar will show some example. If you keep a magnet, you will have loss of the sensing will be taken away, and over sensing will get rectified during the time when you keep the magnet. That is the value of a magnet. And also it tells us about the information about the battery status. If a pacemaker's VOO rate is very low, for example, if it is a Medtronic pacemaker, the VOO rate is expected to be 85. If it is much lesser than 85, you know that the battery status is not good. So that is another advantage of the magnet. So this is just to tell you that a VVI pacemaker at 70 on keeping a magnet goes into VOO at 100 per minute. Likewise, an AAI pacemaker at 70 per minute here. When you keep a magnet here, it increases its rate to 85. Depends on the make. Boston Scientific, it will become 100. St. Jude will have 100. Medtronic will have 85. That's why I told you, you should know your pacemaker. What is the pacemaker? What are the settings of the pacemaker? What is the make? Which company's pacemaker? What is the expected behavior of the particular pacemaker based on the industry specifications? All this you should understand before you interpret and venture into making a diagnosis of normal or otherwise pacemaker function. This is just a dual chamber pacemaker shifting into a DOO mode and keeping the magnet. So the last question is the pacemaker functioning normally? The 3 functions of the pacemaker are: a pacing output should be delivered. Capture function means it should depolarize the chamber if the chamber is excitable. And sensing function is a pacemaker senses intrinsic cardiac activity and responds accordingly, which I've already told at the beginning. So VVI, AAI, etc. So what is the defect here? In the interest of time, we'll go to this particular example. This is a VVI pacemaker. In this long gap that you see here, there is no QRS complex. So if I ask you the question, is there a pacing spike here without a QRS, or no spike and no QRS? These are the spikes, such big spikes that you see here. Here you don't see pacing spikes at all. So this is a pacing output failure. The pacing output did not come when it should come, and so the capture did not happen. So you should not say capture failure, you should say pacing failure. To the contrary, if you have a pacing spike followed by no QRS, you should use the word capture failure. So this is an example of a pacing failure. So I won't go into the details of this. Now I'll show you an example of a capture loss. You see here, there are spikes happening here, but the spike is not followed by a QRS complex. So this is not pacing failure, it is capture failure. In the other example that I showed you, you did not see the spike at all. So there is pacing failure. Here there are spikes without depolarization of the ventricle. So this is an example of a capture failure in a pacemaker which is implanted many years ago. That is because the battery has run out of its charge, and that is why there is erratic pacing. Some are capturing, some are not capturing. But the fact of the matter is there are spikes without depolarization. So this is an example of a capture failure and not a pacing failure. And this is another example. I'll stop with this particular example. This is a dual chamber pacemaker. The first three complexes, these are all ventricular. Wherever there is a QRS, it is a ventricular pacing, because you look at this, there is a nice spike here. These are all simultaneously recorded ECGs. You see nice good spikes here, and there is ventricular capture at the end of the spike. In this long gap, what is happening is, this is AS ventricular paced, atrium sensed, ventricle paced, atrium sensed, ventricular paced. Here what is happening is, atrium is getting sensed, but what is happening is, as you see here, this is a P wave. The P wave is sensed, a ventricular pacing output is delivered, but it is failing to capture. So what you should say here is, this is a dual chamber pacemaker with intermittent loss of ventricular capture, but normal atrial sensing. Atrial lead is functioning well, atrial sensing function is intact, ventricular pacing output is delivered wherever there is atrial sensing, but some of the ventricular outputs are capturing the ventricle and some are failing to capture. So you can use the word here, intermittent loss of ventricular capture in a dual chamber pacemaker. I have marked the P waves for you with this asterisk here. I have marked the red arrows are those places where the ventricle is not captured. So this is a dual chamber pacemaker where there is intermittent loss of ventricular capture. And if you look at this again, Dr. Jaishankar is going to tell you on these aspects. When you interrogate the device with the programmer, the ventricular lead impedance is very high, 2500, which means there is likely to be a lead failure which is responsible for the intermittent capture loss. And when you do a fluoroscopy, you see that there is a lead fracture of the ventricular lead. So that is the importance of interpreting an ECG. Under sensing, I will leave it to Dr. Jaishankar because we are crossing time. All I wanted to say is, in the presence of an intrinsic QRS, there is still delivery of a pacing output. This should not have happened. This is a VVI pacemaker. There is an intrinsic QRS here. This pacing spike should not have come. This pacing spike came because it did not sense the intrinsic activity. So this is a VVI pacemaker which is not sensing intrinsic QRS. So when you change the sensitivity setting, you can make matters better. This is a dual chamber pacemaker where there's loss of atrial sensing. I will not go to the details. Let Dr. Jaishankar take you through this. There's going to be a lot of overlap between what I spoke and what my good friend Dr. Jaishankar is going to follow up with my talk. So I'll stop here and I will just conclude by saying that ECG is a very valuable tool in the follow-up of patients with implanted permanent pacemakers. The ECG should always be interpreted in the light of the pacemaker programmed settings if available. You should know what pacemaker is put for the patient, what company pacemaker has been put, what are the settings of the pacemaker, what are the rate kept, what are the AV delays kept. All that information should be available to us for us to make a meaningful interpretation of the ECG. A meticulous approach to the ECG gives you valuable information on the type of pacemaker, whether it's an atrial-based pacemaker, whether it's a ventricular pacemaker, whether it's a dual-chamber pacemaker, and it also makes us understand whether it is functioning normally. And if it is not functioning normally, the defective function to a large extent can be understood from the ECG. In my personal opinion, you can understand a pacing system malfunction on the basis of the ECG in more than 95% of the time. If you pay meticulous attention to the ECG, lot of times you can understand what's happening. The programmer will only further aid in making a diagnosis, and the programmer also helps you to make adjustments to the settings, and so you can troubleshoot the pacemaker. But the ECG, to a very large extent, if you are very meticulous in your analysis of the ECG, to a large extent you can understand what the problem is. The chamber paced, whether it is capturing, whether it is delivering output, whether there is undersensing, whether there is oversensing, and all those questions can be largely answered by looking at the ECG very carefully. Thank you for your kind attention, and I pass on to Dr. Jaishankar for his talk on troubleshooting and how to go. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, sir. You really simplified and set the stage. As you said, correctly said, there's going to be quite a bit of overlap. I have restricted my slides to probably less than what you have shown. Only the ones which I felt is going to be useful in clinical practice to the students. I don't see any questions in the chat box. Maybe we can take the questions after this, sir, after what I speak, so that it will be easy. If there are any, otherwise we can always answer.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, but we have two questions.
Okay, please show, because I am not able to see the questions.
Sir, Sir, we are not seeing any spikes in all cases from Dr. Suryakant.
Pacemakers can be bipolar pacing, pacemakers can be unipolar pacing. Currently, we leave our pacemakers usually in the bipolar pacing mode. And bipolar pacing mode, because of the filter settings in our ECG systems, recording systems, the spikes need not be as big as you used to see in the older generation unipolar pacing systems. So as you very correctly said, some of the spikes may be very small. Because I showed them very fast, I couldn't spend time with the spikes. But in most of the cases, you will be able to appreciate spikes. And if you don't see spikes, that means it is inhibition of pacing due to intrinsic activity. Let us say there is a ventricular pacemaker programmed at a rate of 60 per minute, and the QRS rate is 80 per minute. Obviously, you won't see spikes. You should not be seeing spikes. If you see spikes there, it is a sensing failure. So to answer your question, spikes can be smaller in bipolar pacing system, and you should see the ECG more carefully, and you will be able to see the spikes in most of the cases. So it's very evident. And the QRS morphology also gives you some clues. Conduction, unless it is a conduction system pacing, where it can always be like a regular QRS itself. Otherwise, the QRS will be marginally broader. You'll have indirect clues. But the spikes often appreciated in most of the cases if you pay attention. What is the other question? Two questions.
No, sir. They both are same.
Sure. Maybe we can, Dr. Jaishankar can also give his talk, and we can answer questions together.
Can I share my slides now? Sir, have you stopped sharing?
Yes, I have.
Yes, sir. You can share, sir.
It's not coming, I think. I go to share screen and then
Sir, after that you have to select your presentation. Just click on the share.
I am not able to get it. The presentation is open.
Sir, first of all, open the presentation and minimize it. Okay.
It's open and minimized. Yeah, I think it did come for a second. Is it coming now?
No, sir. Just click on the share screen and select the option share screen. There are two options, sir. One is video and other is share your screen.
Yeah, I've done that, but somehow.
Yes, sir. You can try it once.
Yeah, share screen, but it is not coming.
Just let me check my screen, sir.
Yeah, because I have minimized my presentation, but I'm not able to get it there.
Sir, you can select application window.
Okay.
There is a three option. Your entire screen, your application window.
Yeah,
Just
I
select
saw
on the.
that. Yeah, I've selected. Now,
Now you can select your presentation.
is it
There
coming
are two
now?
or three options. And now you can click on the share. There is a below side button, share, final button, lower
Yeah.
right corner.
Is it coming now? Are you getting it?
No, sir. Just sir. First of all, click on the share. Just
I've done
start
that.
from beginning.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and start again. Okay,
Yeah.
share. Now share screen.
Yes, sir. Then after application
Screen,
window,
application window.
and then select on the PPT or
Is it coming now? It says product application failed. Is it coming now?
no, sir, not coming.
Something wrong with the. Try once more.
Okay, sir.
Share screen, application window.
Then select on the presentation file, sir.
I have
First,
present. I have selected the presentation file. Now share.
now share. There is a below side share
Yeah,
option.
I've done that, but it's not coming.
Okay, sir. Can you try it once entire screen? I think you have opened your PPT on entire screen. Maybe just click
No.
on the share.
Click on share. Share screen, application window. Now.
Now click on the share. There is below side. Is in the
Yeah.
blue color, sir?
No, it's unless I select, I cannot share. It is not highlighting.
Okay, sir. Let me try it once from my side. My screen is visible.
Yes, I can see your screen.
So, sir, just click on the share. There is a below side. First, start
Yeah.
from beginning. Then
Anything is
after, sir,
coming?
share screen again.
No, now I have to stop sharing. Only then I can go back.
Okay, sir.
Share screen, application window. I think this is going to get application window now.
Yes, sir. And enter. Just click on the presentation file. There will be two or three file.
Yeah, I
which is
have clicked on the presentation.
yes, and then click on the share button, sir.
When
It
I
will
do
be
that,
in.
it's not coming. I've done that many times now.
Okay. So, sir, can I share your slide from my end?
Yeah, sure, you can.
Okay.
Are you able to see my slides?
No, sir, I am not able to see, but you can send me the slide and I will share from my end. Is it better?
How do I send it now? By mail?
Yes, sir.
So in that case, we can request Dr. PRM to do his talk if this is going to
Okay.
take time.
Yes, sir. It will be better.
So, uh,
No
can we
problem.
please, Subramaniam, ask Dr. PRM sir to present?
Yeah, I'll do that. Jay. No problem.
Yeah, because there's some problem they are not able to share.
Yeah.
So can I have your email address on the chat so that I can send it to you?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sir, you
I'll
please
send
go
the
ahead.
details, sir. Yeah, I'll send the mail ID.
Right.
I'm just opening my thing. Tell me if I
Yes,
am
sir.
visible. I can start. Am I audible?
Yes, very much, sir.
Yes, sir. You are
Am I
audible.
visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll start now. Thank you, Jay, for arranging this wonderful Sunday morning program. And thanks to Sun Pharma and Natarajan and Shanmuga joining with me. I know we are a little behind schedule, so I will try to give as many cases as possible. We can stop also when the time is out. So please be free and frank to interrupt me if I am shooting over time. I will try to keep my timer also on. As the topic was given, I thought I will use it like complex case scenarios rather than ECG alone. So where ECG helped in a clinical problem. So few cases, even if a few cases, a lot of learning points I thought share with you. One is a young unfortunate boy, 12-year-old child, came with a recurrent syncope. Interestingly, he is in fact seen by neurologists before coming to us for nearly 2 to 2.5 years. Recurrent syncope, which are treated as a seizure disorder, epilepsy, and given drugs. And after some 2.5 years, he was going in and around, neuro evaluation being done. And clinical evaluation was normal. The neurologist felt either a cardiac cause. He was sent to me by a new neurologist who was seen him after 2 years of treatment. And what is interesting point he gave was he was learning karate at the time. So whenever he was doing intense exercise, he was getting syncope. Number one. Number two, even during heated argument with his mom, he had giddiness. And the clinical cardiac system was normal. ECG was totally normal PR and QTR, QTC interval, and echocardiography was unremarkable. So this is a situation where an ECG, how it helps, I think. We did a Holter. We didn't go for other tests. We did a Holter. You can see an interesting ECG thing. Somewhere in the morning, 10:56, he was in a hurry. He was arguing something he said initially. You can see the varying VPCs, the frequent ventricular premature complexes, and the axis, the polarity varies from time to time. This was the thing we saw in the Holter. And as we continue to see, he was having runs of wide cross rhythm, little bizarre, different morphology, varying axis. This is a thing we saw in the other parts of the Holter. So that opened up a new diagnostic avenue in him. And we were continuing some more shots of the same thing, Holter, showing frequent runs of varying morphology VPCs. If you carefully look at it, the polarity completely changes from one axis to other one. We thought we'll reproduce it by exposing him for a stress test. Though the 12-year-old boy, we are doing a treadmill test. And here the treadmill test is done not for ischemia, but rather look at arrhythmia. So in 3 minutes of the treadmill thing, you can see VPC is appearing in them. And at the end of that, you can see the VP increasing, and the morphology looks almost similar at this point. But as you're following it up, we started having runs of VT. Runs of VT here continuously. So we made a diagnosis at the 4th minute. You can see that VT with the varying axis, the QRS changing. You can see here entirely positive to entirely negative. The diagnosis of a catecholaminergic polymorphic VT was made in. So what is the point of interest is here the boy who has recurrent syncope, who was treated as epilepsy only by carefully analyzing the history when everything was normal, and EKG, Holter monitoring, and stress test brought out the diagnosis CPVT. Not to go into the details of it, but catecholaminergic polymorphic VT is one of the channelopathy. A lot to blame on the ryanodine receptors, calcium loading of the myocardium. Very rare. Each leading electrophysiologist will have a single-digit number of cases, or rarely double-digit in our country. And the prognosis is dismal. That's a sad thing in CPVT. But early diagnosis can help. The treatments are multiple. Maybe if time permits, we can discuss with other presenters also. Natarajan is there, Jay is there, Shanmuga. What we planned in him was we want to load him with beta blocker at that age. At 12 years of age, we didn't want to expose him for other tests, but we want to give a high dose of beta blocker. So we put a pacemaker. Natarajan nicely elucidated all single chamber and atrial pacing. Here, young boy, AV node conduction normal. We put a atrial pacing. The atrial pacing was given only for the purpose of loading him with a high dose beta blocker without causing any bradycardia or bradyarrhythmia, or keeping at a rate of around 60, something like that. So we kept a AAI pacemaker, loaded him with beta blockers. We had other drugs in our mind. We were thinking of sympathectomy, implantation of ICD or ablation at a later date. That is a separate story. If time permits, we can discuss it. But at 12 years, we thought we'll initially start him on medical therapy with high dose, with which he did very well for 4 to 5 years. After that, a lot of problems occurred that we'll discuss later. So this is one thing where an EKG can be normal, exercise can bring something different. Switching gears. Now we are going to see a 51-year-old male patient who is a known case of ischemia heart disease. You can see he had angioplasty, LV dysfunction, mild, around EF of 40, on medical treatment for the other remaining non-critical disease, comes with PR prolongation and intermittent complete heart block. So but he was frequently having heart block. We planned for a dual chamber pacemaker. Again, there can be a thinking, can we put a ICD, can we put a CRT pacing? But logistics did not permit him. So here the symptomatic bradycardia in a ischemic heart disease patient who comes for a pacemaker with certain amount of restriction. So we could not move to a very high-end device. We have put him on a dual chamber pacemaker. Of course, on hypothyroidism, well treated is euthyroid. And he presented after pacemaker, after some months after pacemaker. This happened 3-4 months back, that is nearly 7 to 8 months, come with worsening heart failure symptoms. On examination, nothing remarkable greatly except heart rate of 110, persistent 110 per minute. And blood pressure normal. There were few basic palpitations. Patient was dyspneic, little orthopneic also. And the investigation showed very high BNP, 1980. No evidence of acute coronary syndrome. The drop was less than upper limit, and no significant variation in the renal function or liver function and the hemoglobin norm. And this was empty. So it lands up in the coronary care unit with worsening failure symptom and ECG this sort. The first diagnosis, anybody can think. You can spend some time also, as another I was showing, can see patient is having a wide QRS. The initial diagnosis made interestingly, you can see that the heart rate is, as I said, around 106 to 110 per minute. Constant, same thing. The initial diagnosis made by our team, whoever seen the initial junior fellow, thought it's a VT, where you don't see a proper thing, very wide QRS. And the clue many times we think is in a ischemic heart disease patient, wide QRS tachycardia, when the QRS is wider than 140 milliseconds, if you make a diagnosis of VT, even without seeing anything, you will be right most of the time, but not always. A similar situation here. So we were seeing this ECG for a casual look, it will be looking away ventricular tachycardia. But if you start looking in depth, you can see there are something in the ST segment. In V1, you come here in the lead 2, the suggestion there could have been a P wave. Is there a P wave? Is one thing. We do not know which one is a P wave, the initial negative hump or a positive hump. But all we know is persistently at 110, which is maybe suggests a slow VT. But the clue is here is a patient who has come with a pacemaker history with a dual chamber. So whenever a person with a dual chamber pacemaker coming to worsening symptom, persistent tachycardia near the upper rate, need not be always the upper rate interval, and as we feature like this, think of one variation. I think Jay may cover on is pacemaker mediated tachycardia, which presents as a white class tachycardia. And the interrogation done on him the next day was clearly showing. You can see in this, for my friends, here's a marker channel also, Atrial sensing, ventricular sensing. Atrial sensing, ventricular sensing, atrial sensing, ventricular sensing. As I said, he had an intermittent heart block. Here you can see one ventricular ectopic bit, VSC. After a ventricular sensing, you can get another ventricular sensing without a preceding atrial event. So for a pacemaker, whenever the ventricular event without a preceding atrial event, like the previous beats, it will classify it as a VPC also. So here indeed it was ventricular sensory event, which was a VPC, followed by atrial sensing. Then VPAS, VPAS, VPAS. So continuously ventricular pacing followed by atrial sensing. And I would like to draw your attention, you have to see this VP and AS interval constant, persistent. The first beat, always after that is a constant phased rhythm to atrial event. So the atrial event is linked to the ventricular pacemaker. This is one of the classical locking of where we see in pacemaker mediated tachycardia. So what is the pacemaker mediated tachycardia? A quick look at in this cartoon, you have a atrial lead, you have a ventricular lead in a normal dual chamber pacemaker. So atrium pace, ventricular pace like that. Suppose in this setting, atrium lead is there, ventricular lead is there, they are doing a normal job. One VPC occurs in an unfortunate moment. This PVC will be sensed. The PVC will be sensed by the ventricular lead, number one. And it will start a period called post-ventricular atrial refractory period, during which time the atrium will remain refractory. But if it conducts retrograde, so this VPC, nothing prevents it from the impulse traveling back through the Isperkin system, through the AV window to the atria. So what happens? There's a VPC. This VPC is sensed by the RV lead also by the pacemaker. At the same time, this VPC, as it depolarizes the ventricle, the impulse travels back to the atria. As it travels back to the atria through the Isperkin system, it can even depolarize the atrium also. So the retrograde P wave, that is the P wave created by the retrograde conduction of the VPC, is sensed by the atrial channel now. Sensed by the atrial channel, provided this reaches at a time when the post-ventricular atrial refractory period is completed. Spend on that on a moment on this. That is when the VPC is sensed by the RV lead by the pacemaker, the VPC travels retrogradely back, depolarized in wavefront, goes back to the atria through the AV node and depolarize the atria. But if it happens after the PVASP period set by us, then the atria will sense it. Once the atria senses the retrograde P wave, it will start a new AV interval. Again, anticoagulally the conduction occurs. That is, the pacemaker is what came back through the VPC to the atria as a P wave. It starts on AV interval. At the end of the AV interval, it will pace the ventricle. So here you have a regular rhythm. One VPC occurs, which is retrograde sensed And the retrolytic sense starts an AV interval, the cycle goes on and on. This is a typical or prototype or garden variety of pacemaker immediate tachycardia. For this to happen, we need the atria to sense a retrograde P wave. How it happens? Few scenarios, few clinical scenarios. One is when there is a non-capture. Atrium is not captured, so the atrium is raw, waiting for an impulse to come. It can pick up on P wave. Or for long AV interval. Whichever way, this P wave should occur after the P warp completion, that is post-ventricular atrial refractory period set by us. In this patient, our patient, we have said not only a long AV delay, we kept the P warp shorter to help the patient. So here coming back to the patient's pacemaker parameters, the dual chamber pacemaker, his phase V AV delay was kept at 250 and sense V AV delay at 225. We thought since the intermittent cochlear block, we didn't want to worsen his LV function further by pacing-induced cardiomyopathy. We thought we are helping him by keeping the AV delay longer, allowing for the intrinsic beat to go on and the pacemaker to come only when necessary. But that became a counterproductive in him by setting a milieu for a pacemaker immediate tachycardia. But the machine is intelligent enough to pick it up. A constant interval like this, what it does is a VPA is interval. All that the machine does is for one beat, for one atrial sensory event, it doesn't pace. It doesn't pace the ventricle. Rather, it paces the atria. Usually, the Senjur pacemaker, it is a 330 millisecond after the last atrial sensory event. This atrial pacing spike breaks the circuit, breaks a re-entrant circuit and bring back the rhythm. So that is what happened to this patient. So pacemaker tachycardia is going on, and the atrial paced beat, which came by the intrinsic program in the device to overcome PMTs, broke the circuit and normal sinus returned. But spontaneously, because of the long AV delay he was having, intermittent cochlear block, the pacemaker recurred within 1 beat. You can see here. So it was going, the phenomena was going on. So we understood that, and we are looking at, as I said, in him the P warp was 275 milliseconds. We kept a long AV delay. So we changed those settings. After changing those settings, this is an algorithm. By one time, I'm not going into details of it, but constant VPAS interval can be checked by the machine. Once PMT is confirmed, all it does is, instead of ventricular pacing after the last sensory event, that is retrograde P wave, it paces the atria. That is the modality just we saw. We change the parameters. Once we change the parameter, is another episode where it ended. Patient was going back to a normal dual chamber pacing rhythm and intermittent atrial pacing and ventricular sensing rhythm. So the moral is, this is the patient's intrinsic rhythm. When he was when inhibiting the pacemaker, you can see a long AV delay. First degree heart block as an intermittent complete heart block with a pattern right bundle block pattern. So the moral is, whenever you encounter a white cross tachycardia in a person's pacemaker, that too not a very high rate, consider VT. But remember, there is a condition called PMT, which can be easily tackled. The way we can manage is change the pacemaker programming, particularly extending the P warp, adjust sensitivity, all those things. I will reserve it for want of time. This is also a little complex case scenario. I wish Natarajan will be happy to discuss at the end on this. Here is a patient, a medical physician's wife, 53, 54 years, I think. 53, 54 years, asymptomatic, no other major cardiac illness, normal echocardiogram, not a diabetic, mild hypertensive, not on any bradycardic drugs. This patient comes to us for an opinion because she developed left block for a period of 4 to 5 years or more than that, number one. And recent onset in the last 1 year, PR prolongation also. As you see, there's a long PR interval touching nearly 260 milliseconds. So the question to us was, a middle-aged lady, asymptomatic, left bundle branch block, progressively developing AV block, also first degree AV block with no apparent cause. What is my risk? Should I have to undergo a pacemaker? Will I get a complete heart block? This question often comes across in our practice, particularly if it's a caring physician who brings his wife. The question asked to us, what will you do? So, having discussed a lot, commonly we don't want to do anything when they are asymptomatic. We are told that you are asymptomatic, we don't want to do anything, but there is a significant conduction system disease. The next question is, will there be a possibility of conduction block? Will I get a complete heart block? Will I have a syncope or syncope-related injury? Then are we going to consider pacemaker? We said, yes, definitely we are going to get a complete heart block, we will think of pacemaker. Third question was, then how to predict it? Can you do something? If it is important, I will undergo a pacemaker, how to do it. So one of the recommendation by international guideline is to know where is the block in the situation. So here the person with the first degree AV block, the block can be, I often tell them, the PR interval, the PR interval is due to intra-atrial conduction at the AV nodal level, up his bundle and his ventricle. We want to know where is the block. Is it the atria or is the block is in the AV node itself as it meanders through the waveform, or is it from the his bundle to ventricle? That is the time it takes from the his bundle to go through the bundle branch and produce a QRS complex. Distal the block, dangerous. We all know that. Proximal the block, protective reasonably, but distal the block, always dangerous. So we thought we'll do an EP study to look at where is the level of block. So a basic EP study with a minimal thing, we first introduce only a His catheter. You can see there's a AH interval 197 milliseconds. You can see there is a intracardiac at the His catheter level, there's a AH interval of 197 milliseconds. But when it comes to the HV interval, if you carefully look for it in the distal His catheter, you can see a very nice spike of His bundle potential. Proximal little early. In reality, it may be distal or can be even a right bundle, but you can see a His spike here also. And the HV interval, you can see 93 milliseconds. That is interesting because the guideline classically says when the HV interval, the distal block, normally is 35 to 55 milliseconds. Very sensitive measurement. A longer is always detrimental. But they recommend pacing only if it crosses 100 milliseconds. If it crosses 70, we get alarmed. We discuss. But more than 100 is one of the class 2A indication to put in a pacemaker. So this patient, significant prolongation, but not reach a cutoff of 100 milliseconds. So we thought, can we look at further? This is at a heart rate of around 75 to 80 per minute at the heart rate. So we thought we'll pace the atria. So we introduced another lead. So you can see now his catheter showing his the complexes, and there is a catheter kept in the right atrium. We are trying to pace. Here, when the first spike did not capture, but still you can see the HV what we saw, HV interval prolongation. Then the atrium capture occurred. Atrium captured, you can see the HV prolongation, you can see the HV is little longer. Interestingly, the next is atrial pacing, the hitch has become 2 bits or 2 components. So what was appear a single His HV interval, now we have a proximal His and a distal His. Religiously being occurring, proximal His and distal His getting conducted. So pacing at a rate of around 698 or 700 milliseconds, you can see that is hardly 90 to 100 milliseconds, not very, very rapid pacing. When you pace the atria, the His prolongation occurs. Not only that, the His becomes two components. This is one of the important signs of intra-ECN block. Inside the His bundle, extreme delay occurs. So the same patient, after some within few seconds, as you continue to pace, you can see the split His potential, 2 His, and this case here, 1 His followed by next and no QRS. So this patient was having a significant AV delay, ECN level, intra-ECN level, with pacemaker, the His bundle is going proximal His potential and distal His, and which fails to conduct intermittently, even at a heart rate of 100 to 110. So, though the patient is asymptomatic, though the patient is extremely comfortable, but for the ECG changes, our intracardiac electrogram with a simple pacing maneuver showed a significant distal disease. This patient, we have advised, based on this finding, a dual chamber pacemaker due in the next few days. Before closing, I think already I have taken 20 minutes of time. Though the number of cases is little, it was giving so much of information, a learning point to me. I thought it will be similar for my colleagues and my friends also. Last case before I close, 22-year-old male smoker coming with atypical chest pain. An era of primary PCI, this is the ECG, he comes to the hospital. The moment you see, the first thought to my fellow happened is, sir, there is a AVL Q wave. There's a coving ST-like thing. There's a T inversion. Similar thing I see in the lead one. Should I have to take him for a angio, so the cath lab suit and plan for angiogram, primary PCI of that nature? Because smoker, heavy smoker, 22 years. But spend little extra time, though we often think that ECG should be done properly. Here the ECG are done properly. That's a clue. You see there is a negative P wave in AV, lead one. Negative P in AVL and positive in AVR. And coming to V1 to V6, the QRS is not growing, rather regressing. Progressive regressing. You can easily think, I'm thinking of anti-LMI, old other things. But this combination should always alert you not to go for early angio, not to treat like an STEMI, not to think of metabolic cause, but rather do a right side lead and echo or chest X-ray. So coming to right side leads, when we do, you can see the R wave is growing from V1 to V6. And all we did for this patient, now we are entire combo, you have a negative P wave in lead 1 AVL, right side is growing, and progressive loss of R wave from V1 to V6, and positive P wave in AVR. This patient was a true dextrocardia. He had a true dextrocardia, not a technical dextrocardia, not a lead misplacement. He had a true dextrocardia. Remember that rather than pushing them to a thing. So I'll stop with this interesting congenital problem. Maybe if time permits, we can discuss more. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Very insightful.
I'll stop here.
Yeah, let's see if there are any questions in the chat box for you. Subbu, can you just see? There are questions for him.
Sir, there is no any question from our attendee side.
Right. So, sir, we can probably wait till the other two presentations are over, if it's okay to you.
Yes. So can I share my screen, Dr. Jaishankar?
Yeah. I'll try once more from here because it'll be easy if I play.
Okay.
If it doesn't play, then you please share. Sir, can you stop sharing, sir? Tiaram, sir. You are muted, sir.
Yeah, stop sharing. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank
sir,
you very
audible.
much. Nice presentation. No questions for you for now. So I'll see if I can share my slides and
We'll come back, sure.
we'll come back. Are you able to see my slides?
No, sir.
Okay, in that case, you please share for me so that we don't waste time.
Sir, is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible. So is that the full screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So good morning, dear friends. Again, thank you to my predecessor speakers, Dr. K.U. Natarajan and Dr. T.R.M. for setting the stage. And thanks Sun Pharma for organizing this. And sorry for the technical glitch. So my job was identification of pacemaker malfunction. So I just rephrased it like this. As Dr. K.U. had rightly pointed out, we have to know every single detail of the pacemaker. So I have rephrased the presentation as detecting pacemaker malfunction on ECG, what's real and what's not. Go on to the first slide, please. So background information is very essential. The patient data and pacemaker data. So we need to know if there is an exposure to electromagnetic interference. What is the lifestyle of the patient? Has there been any trauma to the pacemaker system? implant site, whether it is left or right pectoral. The 12 lead ECG is always important, whether and we should always have the X-ray of the chest to look at the leads and the implanted PG. And time to time we need Holter monitoring as well. As regards pacemaker data, as Dr. Kayun elegantly pointed out, what is the model of the pacemaker, leads, the IPG, the program parameters, if you have any telemetry values for battery and leads from the EGM and Markle channels, sensing and pacing thresholds, diagnostic information if any, and if a magnet has been applied on top of the pacemaker. Next, please. So this has been told clearly. So what's important to bear in mind is that we seldom see problems with the dual chamber pacing system. All the pacemaker malfunction or so-called malfunction, the pseudo malfunction, occur primarily with the single chamber based pacing system. And the pacemaker system consists of the implantable pulse generator called IPG with a wire connected on one end to the pulse generator and the other end fixed either with a tying lead or with a screwing lead onto the myocardium. Next, please. So recognition of pacemaker is very important. We see on top the pacemaker rhythm and on bottom is the pacemaker, the marker channel. So there are two examples given. On top is the pacing spike followed by QRS. It's a VVI at 60 beats per minute, and the third complex shows what's called a sense event. So pacemaker has sensed an intrinsic cardiac event, so it is not fired there. So you don't see any pacing spikes out there. The fourth complex onwards, it starts firing. Fifth complex also fires. Sixth complex sends the event, so it's a VVI at 60 beats per minute. Compared to the lower half, where we see a pacing spike followed by P wave and then an intrinsic QRS, and the marker channel shows it as AP or atrial based pacing. So it's a AAI pacemaker. After the first three beats, the fourth beat there is no pacing spike because the intrinsic is sensed by the pacemaker, so it's an inhibition of pacemaker function. So it's basically a atrial based pacemaker, atrial channel based pacemaker, the AAI at 60 beats per minute. Next, please. Click on, please. So this is a patient, one of our patients, 65-year-old lady, post pacemaker, DTDR, sent home 3 days ago, comes back with giddiness. The resident rushes and says, sir, there is a tachycardia, it's a broad QRS, and I don't see any pacing spikes. So I think this question was asked to Dr. Kayun before. You don't see pacing spikes, and similar question was posed by Dr. TRM sir, broad complex tachycardia in a pacing patient with an underlying pacemaker. So if you look carefully, we are supposed to look at all the 12 leads for the pacing spike. Lead V5 and V6 are showing a very small pacing spike followed by capture. So it is pacing all right. The patient has giddiness for some other reason, one need not be perturbed. Interrogation of device showed everything is normal. Please click again. Is in contact with the myocardium, and we can see the negative and positive electrodes very close to each other. The distance traveled by the depolarized current is very small, very close to the tip of the electrode. So the negative pole being in contact with the endocardium, the positive pole being a little farther away. So since the distance traveled is very less, you have a very small pacing spike. So this is not uncommon. Classical bipolar pacing will have something like this. The next slide has been already clicked here, and we can see big pacing spikes. And we can see two pacing spikes, one pacing spike followed by P wave, the next pacing spike followed by QRS. So such a big pacing spike occurs classically with a unipolar pacing. Please click again, and you will see please click on the slide. Yeah, so it's a unipolar pacing. Onto the right, you have the cartoon where the negative electrode, the cathode, is in contact with endocardium, the positive pole being with the pulse generator, and the direction of current, you can see current flows from the positive to the negative. It has to travel a long distance, hence it generates a big pacing spike. So very important to know what causes a small spike or a negligible spike, and why you get a big spike with a unipolar pacing. So this is a normal phenomenon. Next. So this also has been told by, as I said earlier, there will be an overlap between me and Dr. Natarajan's talk, a non-capture. So non-capture means there is a pacing spike, but it has not depolarized the myocardium. So no evidence of depolarization after pacing artifact. On top is the pacemaker ECG, on bottom is the marker channel. First three complex shows pacing spike followed of atrial and ventricular both chambers being paced, AP, VP going on, and the fourth complex shows as atrial pacing and ventricular pacing, but the atrial pacing is not followed by a P wave. So that's the loss of atrial capture, and the fifth complex shows a normal P wave. So it's an atrial sense followed by pacing spike and a QRS, so atrial sense and ventricular pace. So that's very easy, and all this can be made out by a quick glance at the 12-lead ECG. Next, please. So some important terminologies we should know is fusion beat. So as we run through this rhythm strip, we see a pacing spike followed by QRS. It's a single chamber based pacing system, and the next one shows a relatively narrow QRS after pacing spike, and next two complexes shows an intrinsic sinus beat as a P wave followed by QRS, and the fifth complex shows a pacing spike and which has not done anything to the sinus beat. The fifth complex again shows a pacing spike followed by a not too broad QRS. Please click again. So fusion beat is, please click on the slide. The combination of an intrinsic beat and a pace beat is called a fusion beat. Next, the morphology varies. In other words, a fusion beat doesn't really look like a pace beat or an intrinsic beat. Next, the pacemaker and intrinsic beat, both of them contribute to depolarization in fusion beat. So that's pretty much clear. The first complex is a pace beat, and the third and fourth complexes are sinus beats, and the second and sixth complex is a fusion beat. Please click again. So there it goes. It's quite easy to understand. Next important terminology is a pseudo-fusion beat. Pseudo-fusion is a pacing pulse falls on an intrinsic beat. The pacing pulse is ineffective and the intrinsic complex is not altered. The pacemaker does not contribute to depolarization in pseudo-fusion beats. We see the the fifth complex where it has fallen on the sinus beat and it has not done anything to change the morphology of the sinus beat. Next. So there it shows the pacing spike falls on the intrinsic sinus beat but has not altered the morphology. It looks like a fusion, but in fact it has not done anything to affect the depolarization. So it does not contribute to depolarization in that particular beat. It's called a pseudo-fusion beat. Next. So undersensing has also been told before, but just to recap, undersensing means the pacemaker does not see the intrinsic beat and therefore does not respond appropriately. So in simple terms, whenever the pacing spike falls all over the QRS complex, it is undersensing. Obviously, it is not sensed what is going on in the intrinsic beat of the patient. So it is the pacing spike comes at the intended time interval it has been set, as shown here. The pacing, it's a VVI pacing at 60 beats per minute. The first two beats are captured normally. The third beat, there is a P wave followed by QRS, but the pacing spike has fallen on the ST segment and it has not sensed the intrinsic event. And fourth beat, again, after the T wave, a pacing spike has come. The marker channel all the time shows as ventricular paced beat. So VVI at 60 beats per minute, the pacemaker does not see the intrinsic beat, just keeps firing inappropriately. The danger in such a pacing system is a pacing spike falling on the critical refractory phase of the cycle, where an R on T PVC and triggering a depolarization can cause a what's called R on T PVC and causing VT, which is not desirable. Next. So oversensing is the pacemaker has sensed some event and gets inhibited. That's what is in oversensing. So we see on top the EGM and bottom is the marker channel. We see the marker channel shows some intrinsic activity in the fourth complex as shown in the arrow, and on top of the ECG we see there is no activity. So the electrical signal other than the intended P or R wave is detected. This is oversensing and the pacemaker gets inhibited, and that's not desirable in a patient who is sort of dependent on the pacemaker. Any non-cardiac or extra-cardiac signal which is sensed or oversensed by the pacemaker can be detrimental to the patient. Next. This classically occurs in myopotential oversensing. We don't see this very commonly anymore because of the modern pacemakers. We are able to adjust the sensitivity nicely. So the most common source of an extra cardiac physiological signal that causes oversensing is myopotential inhibition, which classically occurs with pectoralis, rectus abdominis, diaphragmatic muscle, and arm movements. As shown here, we see a lot of tremor artifacts kind of thing, and this is because of the myopotential being oversensed. Taken from textbook. Next, please. So after the most important thing, as I said earlier, true malfunction is sort of rare in modern pacemakers. It's most often a pseudo malfunction, wherein it's a false malfunction. It's an unusual, unexpected, and eccentric behavior of the pacemaker. The ECG findings appear to result from malfunction of pacemaker, but they represent normal pacemaker function. One of the important things which has been pointed out by both the previous speakers is application of magnet on top of the pacemaker, which can alter the behavior of the pacemaker. Next, please. So magnet operation, magnet application causes the pacemaker to go and pacen at the magnet rate. There is no sensing, so it does not sense what is going on underneath. It just paces constantly. So if you apply a pacemaker magnet on top of a dual chamber pacemaker, it becomes DOO, only chamber. The first letter stands for the chamber pace. So both the chambers are continuously paced, as shown here in this example. First three complexes are DDD pacemaker. The moment the third complex, this thing is applied, we see that constantly the rate increases. It doesn't sense anything. The magnet rate is typical for each company. It's different. For some companies it is 90 beats per minute, the others it is 100 beats per minute. So it's very important to know the magnet rate value of each company, and more importantly, this is useful at follow-up, because if, for example, the magnet rate of a particular make or model is 100 beats per minute, and if it drops down by 10 to 15% at follow-up, it's indication of depletion of battery. So from 100, if it falls down to 85 beats per minute, it may be cause for interrogation of the device to see an elective replacement of the pulse generator. Next is the important thing is the rate responsive pacemaker. As shown on the bottom of the cartoon, VVIR 60 to 120. So we should know the settings of the pacemaker. A pacemaker where the heart rate accelerates or decelerates can be perceived as an anomalous behavior of the pacemaker, wherein it is actually a normal behavior, where whenever the patient has some kind of a physiological exertion, like fear, fright, or anxiety, or even exertion, can increase the heart rate. The heart rate increases from a fixed rate of 60 beats per minute, the so-called lower rate of the pacemaker, up to 120 beats per minute, which is not an anomalous behavior, it is a normal behavior. To the left of the panel, the pacemaker is at 60 beats per minute, and to the right of the panel, you can see the pacing spike followed by QRS at 120 beats per minute. So we need to know the programmed values before we can make a judgment, and rate responsive pacing is not a malfunction, it's a normal function. Next. The important thing is the hysteresis of the pacemaker, where when all of us, when we go to sleep at night, the intrinsic heart rate falls to as low as 40 beats per minute. So if we keep the lower rate of the pacemaker at 60 or 70 beats per minute, as shown in this example, all the time the patient will be pacing, even at night when it's not desirable. We don't need to have that pacing at night. So basically, some of the pacemakers we can switch on the hysteresis, where it allows a lower rate between sensed events to occur. So as shown to the left of the panel, the lower rate is 70 beats per minute, and we can set the hysteresis rate at 50 beats per minute, so that the pacemaker at night, once we switch on the hysteresis function, only when the heart rate falls below 50 will the pacemaker fire at night. So this can be mistaken for oversensing. We can see on the fourth complex there's an intrinsic beat. It is not oversensed, it's the hysteresis feature of the pacemaker which has been switched on. So whenever the heart rate drops to 50 or less, then only the pacemaker starts functioning at night. In the daytime it may function at 70 beats per minute. Next.
Yes,
Crosstalk is an important thing. It's not a true malfunction. In a dual chamber pacemaker, pacemaker stimulus in one chamber is sensed in the other chamber, and that can lead to crosstalk. For the pacemaker dependent patient, inhibition could result in asystole. So, for example, somebody's atrial channel pacing is sensed by the ventricular channel, and ventricular channel does not pace, then can lead to inhibition and asystole. So this occurs classically with high atrial output settings when we have an amplitude something like 5 or 6 or a pulse width greater than 0.7. Then and the very high ventricular setting, sensitivity setting, then the crosstalk can occur. So meaning when you pace the atrium, it can be sensed by the ventricle and that can get inhibited. Next, please. So this is taken from the textbook where the crosstalk inhibition has occurred. The third and fourth complexes shows the atrial pacing, which has gone on, but there is no ventricular pacing. The first two complexes show the EGM in the atrium and ventricular channels, where both the pacing spikes followed by P wave and QRS are seen. Then third and fourth, only atrial pacing is seen. The ventricle has got inhibited. This crosstalk inhibition can be detrimental in high atrial output settings in patients who are totally dependent on pacing when they do not have an underlying rhythm. Next. Another important thing is cross stimulation, which is sad and embarrassing thing to occur. Stimulation of one cardiac chamber when stimulation of other is expected. So if you carefully see complexes 2, 3, and 4, a pacing spike followed by QRS and then another pacing spike. So we pace the atrium, the ventricle gets captured. Pace the ventricle with the T wave. Obviously, it's an inadvertent placement of ventricular port, ventricular lead into the atrial port, and atrial lead into the ventricular port in the pacemaker. So all the time when pacemaker leads are connected onto the pacemaker, we have to ensure the correct serial number of the atrial or ventricular lead, check with the industry person, and then connect to the appropriate port. Otherwise, this embarrassing situation can occur. Latency is again not a malfunction. Basically, after pacing spike, there is not much time delay before the atrium or the ventricle is depolarized, but sometimes you can have a delay of as high as 80 to 100 milliseconds as shown here. Pacing spike followed by a 100 millisecond delay before the QRS is generated. It occurs usually due to metabolic factors, very common in patients with chronic kidney disease who are on dialysis. Commonest metabolic factors being acidosis, alkalosis, hyperkalemia, severe hyperglycemia, hypoxemia, and it can occur in the background of viral infections as well. Next, please. In this case, the potassium was 7 millimole per liter. Much of the ECGs have been shown. Only thing is, I would like to highlight on top of every shown ECG example here is the program parameters written. On the bottom is the ECGs. You can see pacing spike followed by QRS and 2 sensed events, 3 paced complexes, again sensed and paced. So, and we see on top VVI pacemaker 70 beats per minute, a magnet rate during battery test, and hysteresis has been off. Please click on the slide. It's a VVI based pacemaker, normal capture, normal sensing at 70 beats per minute. You see, please go back. So first pacing complex, second and third are sensed, and then at 70 beats per minute, you will have the ventricle being captured. Next, please. Again, we have to carefully look at the program parameters. Mode is VVI, base rate 70, hysteresis off. We can see no pacing spikes. We see a normal sensed event, P and QRS. Please click on. So we do not know the pacing function, but we definitely know the normal sensing pattern. So it's a VVI pacemaker from the program parameters. At this point of time, during interrogation, the patient is in his own sinus rhythm and a normal sensing going on. Capture is unknown because we don't see a pacing spike depolarizing the myocardium. Next, please. So again, program parameters, VVI, hysteresis on. So that's very important. program parameters at 70 beats per minute. First three complexes are showing a sensed event, and fourth and fifth pace, and then so on. It goes on. Next, please. Please click on it. So we see a normal capture, normal sensing, and with initiation of hysteresis. As I said earlier, I re-emphasize this feature has to be switched on in those patients who have some degree of AV nodal conduction, so that we can avoid unnecessary pacing during periods of high vagal activity, that is at night. Next, please. Again, program parameters, VVI, there is a magnet response, hysteresis is off, and rate is 70 beats per minute. The first few beats captured, and then sensing, capture, all this going on. Next, please. So we see at 70 beats per minute, whenever there is a sensing, still the third, fourth, fifth, sixth beats, there are sensed QRS, but the pacemaker has failed to sense. It delivers the output at 70 beats per minute constantly. So there is a loss of ventricular sensing. Next. Again, we have to look at the program parameters. Second beat, fourth beat, fifth beat, there is a pacing spike, not much of by way of capture. Next, please. So loss of ventricular capture, and there is a loss of sensing also, because the pacing spike is falling all over. Next. Again, look at the program parameters and look carefully at first few beats, third, fourth complex, and fifth complex, and then there's a loss of capture and there's undersensing as well. Next, please. So, sorry, oversensing. Normal capture in the third beat, fourth beat is fine, fifth complex, it is sense something and has not delivered. There's a small pause before the sinus beat occurs. So this thing we have to run through each and every complex, see if it is sensed or paced, whether it is the pacing stimulus artifact occurs on time, whether it is sensed something, oversensed or undersensed. The best way to diagnose oversensing is when the pacing spike falls all over the QRS complex. Next. We see again program parameters, base rate at 70, magnet response is there, and see pacing spike up at 70 beats per minute, and then those are the sensed events. So normal capture, but ventricular undersensing, it just goes on firing at will. Next. We look at base, it's a VVIR pacemaker, 70 beats per minute, and hysteresis is off. And please click again. Few beats are captured, then there's a sensed event. Next, please. So VVIR, basically it's a rate responsive pacemaker. Patient does some activity, the rate increases, there's a normal capture and sensing, and this is called sensor drive. The last letter R stands for the rate responsive feature of the pacemaker. Next. So this is very important. You can actually go back one slide, click back once, and we can see base rate 60, maximum track rate 120, AV delay 200, P was 250 milliseconds, and we see first atrial sensing followed by pacing spike, ventricular capture, and on the sixth complex there is a atrial pacing spike, but there is no P wave. Seventh complex, atrial pacing spike, no P wave, so loss of atrial capture. Next. And normal ventricular capture. Click, please. So sensing is probably normal, but the sixth and seventh complexes, there's a pacing spike on the atrium, but no
Yes,
capture.
sir, you can start now.
Next, please. So normal ventricular capture. Next, please. And we do not have an idea about the ventricular sensing because all the ventricular events are here captured by a pacing spike. And those two arrows show clearly loss of atrial capture after the first few beats, which have shown a normal atrial sensing. Next, please. An important thing here, again, base rate 60, So all the time you have to look at the program parameters. Maximum track rate 120, AB delay of 200 millisecond, P warp of 250 millisecond, and I will run through the all the complexes. Pacing spike followed by inverted P wave and normal QRS with no pacing spike before that. Fourth complex shows pacing spike followed by upright P wave, pacing spike followed by a deformed QRS. So this is going on. Please click on the slide once. Please click. Normal atrial capture. But the fourth beat has a morphology of P wave different from the first three beats, so possible pseudo fission on the fourth atrial output. Next, please. We do not have an idea about the atrial sensing because all the time there is a pacing spike followed by a P wave, so we do not know the underlying sense atrial event. Next, please. And there is a loss of ventricular capture in the fourth beat because there is quite a bit of delay and probably it's only a PVC. Next. But ventricular sensing is normal, but in the first three beats it's quite okay. The fourth beat there is a loss of ventricular capture with a PVC. Next. So again, to the right is shown on top is shown the base rate. 60 beats per minute, maximum track rate of 120 beats per minute, P warp of 250. These program parameters are very important to know. And we see after the fourth beat, there is a P wave followed by pacing spike. So it has not sensed the underlying atrial event. Normal atrial capture with one beat showing loss of atrial capture. Next, please. But all the ventricular complexes are preceded by a pacing spike. There is atrial undersensing, it is not sensed. Next, please. And normal ventricular capture. Next. We do not have an idea about the ventricular sensing because there is no intrinsic QRS there. All are paced QRS. Next, please. Again, we need to know the program parameters as shown on the top. But if you look at the complexes, the pacing spike is falling after the QRS in the third complex and in the sixth complex as well. Please click again. So normal atrial capture, normal atrial sensing because the sixth beat is a sensed P wave. Normal ventricular capture with 2 beats of loss of ventricular loss of capture, and more importantly, the pacing spike is falling all over the QRS. There is a ventricular undersensing that we need to bear in mind. Pacing spike falling all over K-wire, it is undersensing the underlying events. Next. So very important thing again, base rate 60, maximum track rate 120 beats per minute. If you look carefully to the left of the panel, first 3 or 4 complexes is showing a P wave followed by QRS. The rate is the upper track rate, which is 120 beats per minute, and then we have a P wave which is not conducted. So this is the upper track rate behavior. For some reason, patient's heart rate has increased beyond 120 and patient has started venky backing.
Yes,
next. So the explanation will come. Initiation of 2:1 block at upper track rate. It's a normal upper rate behavior. So the pacemaker will not fire beyond 120 beats per minute. Perhaps not desirable in the elderly. So we set the upper track rate at 120 or 130. Some of the pacemakers are inherently having that MTR of 120 beats per minute. Hence the importance of knowing the program parameters. It is not a loss of pacemaker function. It is just that the upper track rate has reached and it will not fire so that the patient does not develop problems with the tachycardia. Next. Please click next. Yeah. So again, this has been shown by Dr. TRM sir. We need to know the maximum track rate, first pace beat followed by P wave and pace beat followed by QRS, first 2 beats. Then there is the PVC. Whenever PVC triggers the tachycardia, all the time we should have the pacemaker mediated tachycardia in mind, in particularly when the P warp is so very short, 250 milliseconds. The P warp all the time, whenever we have this, it's by default setting from the industry, a P warp of 250. But if a PVC does trigger a tachycardia, patient is uncomfortable, we have to prolong the P warp to delay or abolish the VA conduction. Please click again. So we see a normal atrial capture, normal atrial sensing, normal ventricular capture. We don't have an idea of ventricular sensing, but initiation of pacemaker-mediated tachycardia due to a PVC. And sometimes when the patient is in persistent tachycardia, all you have to do to stop this endless loop tachycardia is put a magnet on top of the pacemaker and the tachycardia gets abolished. Next, please. So to conclude, please click again. True pacemaker malfunction is unknown or uncommon in modern days. Pseudo malfunction is much more common. Next, please. Familiarity with basics of pacemaker function is very important. Knowledge of clinical background all the time and details of program parameters is very essential before we make a judgment on pacemaker function or malfunction. Familiarity with special features like magnet operation, upper track rate behavior, hysteresis is very important. Most importantly, the systematic approach, which my previous two speakers so elegantly pointed out, is quintessential in sorting out problems related to pacemaker where a true malfunction is virtually unknown. Thank you very much, and let's see if there are any questions, or otherwise, since we are lagging in time, we go on to Dr. Shanmugasundaram. Thank you. Are there any questions, Subbu, or we request Dr. Shanmugam to speak? Subramaniam, are you there?
Sir, there is no any question, sir.
No question. So I think I can see Dr. Shanmugasundaram. Good morning. Hello.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, I think Dr. TRM sir and Dr. KUN sir had set the stage. I just ran through. There was some technical glitch. The floor is all yours. Please set it on fire. We are eager to see you talking on the advanced pacemakers, how the ECG behaves. Over to you, Dr. Shanmugasundaram.
Thank you, sir. Once again, I would like to thank you again for
You're not audible yet.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you're audible. Please share your screen.
Slides are visible, sir?
No, not yet. I think you're having problem similar to mine. So,
Hello.
Yeah.
can you please help Mr. Ankit?
Sir,
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah.
Sir, can you share your screen from beginning, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing it.
Sir, first of all, select on share.
Yeah.
Then, sir, another option share screen. Second option is just click on it.
Share screen. Yeah, I've done that.
Then after application window option is there.
Yeah.
Just click on the application window, and
Yeah.
there will be 3 or 2 application as you are opening in your laptop. You have to select.
Yeah.
You have to just click on the application which is you have to share, and then below side there is another option share, last option.
I've done that, but my PPTs are not getting.
Correct. I had a similar problem. That is the case. You may have to mail to them, and then he can share it for you.
Okay, sir. So the last option is, can you share the slide with me so I can share from my side?
You have his email address, Dr. Shanmugam. So the email address will be
Sir, actually, Ramasamy has sent you, sir, in your WhatsApp. Please check, sir. Mail ID.
webmeet@imagicahealth.com. Sir, I think we may have to skip the quiz, sir. TRM, sir. We may have to skip the quiz.
Yeah.
Delay ಆಯ್ತು, sir.
ஆமா already 12:10 ஆச்சு.
12:10.
But almost quiz like cases, lot of cases, lot of points. The questions maybe we can discuss on that.
If there are questions, yes, sir. Sure.
Sir, mailed it. So, can you see my screen now, sir?
Ankit, have you received the mail?
Sir, can you see my screen now, sir? PPT now?
No, sir, it is not
No.
visible.
But I got the option now of sharing the PowerPoint. Let me try again.
Yes, sir, you can select and share.
I've done that.
Just
So I've selected. Is it visible now?
No, not yet. But have you mailed it across to them?
Yes, sir. I mailed it, sir. Mailed
It
it.
will come 1 minute longer. But only thing is, if you control it, becomes easy to highlight. I think the slides are available now. Shanmugha Sundaram?
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, my slide is visible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's visible. It's visible.
Yes. Shanmugha Sundaram, you have to make yourself visible. You are not seen. Yeah. Good. Please carry on.
Sorry for the technical errors. As I said, some technical error which is preventing me from sharing the screen. So anyway, am I audible now, sir? Am I clear?
Yeah, very loud and clear. Yes.
So I think the last session for the day is ECGs in CRT, His-bundle pacing, and left bundle pacing. Next slide, please. So if you want to know the difference between these, if you understand the difference between these two pictures, then probably you can can press the next button. Next slide. Next. Yeah. So if previous slide. So if you understand the difference between these two pictures, then probably you'll know what exactly is the difference between RV pacing and ECG in CRT, His-bundle, and left bundle pacing. So let us see it one by one. So first we'll start with the ECGs in CRT. Next slide. So we know the normal cardiac conduction system. So it starts in the sinoatrial node, and via 3 internodal pathways, it reaches the AV node. From there, we have His-bundle, so which divides into right bundle and left bundle. So from the left bundle, the impulses can reach the ventricular myocardium, and from the right bundle, it reaches the right ventricular myocardium, so via the Purkinje networks. So ultimately, from the SA node to the Purkinje, to the ventricular myocardium, the fibers are very well insulated, and this helps in normal electrical activity of the heart. So if you have any problem in any of these sites, maybe in SA node, AV node, or His-bundle, so the patient can have a symptomatic bradycardia. So ultimately, the patient may need a permanent pacemaker implantation. So next slide, please. But in other segment of the population where we popularly label it as a heart failure patient, there are two important things which we have to address. So one is the pump failure, and another one is going to be the arrhythmia, this rhythm disturbance. So in pump failure, we know that the LV is going to have a chronic LV dilatation, especially in patients where the QRS is going to be wide. So ultimately, the LV dilatation is going to produce a reduction in contractility and some amount of mitral regurgitations, which ultimately results in recurrent heart failure hospitalization. Next slide, please. So let us take an example, typical example of a 63-year-old female with a dilated cardiomyopathy and ECG showing a left bundle branch block, which is a complete left bundle branch block with a QRS duration of more than 160 milliseconds. Echo showed an ejection fraction of around 25%, and she had multiple episodes of heart failure hospitalizations, and coronaries were fortunately normal. So this is a clinical scenario which we usually face more often with the frequent heart failure hospitalization in a patient with a wide QRS. Next slide, please. So ultimately, we have many drugs which are available, like AC inhibitors, ARBs, beta blockers, digoxin, diuretics, and even the latest RNAs. So which can produce some sort of palliation, but ultimately in many of these patients, especially with the wide QRS morphology, many a time they won't respond that good to drugs alone. So we may have to look for some other options. Of course, the gold standard therapy in patients with the wide QRS and frequent heart failure is going to be a cardiac resynchronization therapy. Next slide, please. So in cardiac resynchronization therapy, so we may be putting 3 leads, one in the left ventricle epicardially via coronary sinus, the other lead will be in the right ventricle, and the third lead will be in the right atrium. So the concept is, if you have a desynchronous contraction due to wide QRS, the septum and lateral level will not be contracting synchronously. So you have to produce a synchronized contraction by placing one lead on the RV, which is going to capture the septum, and another one lead in the LV free valve via the coronary sinus. So if you are going to pace it simultaneously, so instead of the desynchronous contraction which occurs during the wide QRS activation, this is going to produce a synchronized contraction, thereby improving the LV function, and in some cases, thereby producing an electrical as well as mechanical remodeling to improve the heart failure symptoms of the patient. Next slide, please. So we need to know where exactly the pacing stimuli is originating to know how the ECG will be looking like. We know that in RV pacing, the RV lead will be in the RV right ventricle, either it may be in the apex or the septum. So ultimately, it is more of an inframedial location where the electrical impulse is going to start. So the impulse will be moving from the inframedial or from the right side of the heart inferiorly towards the left side of the heart superior. On the other hand, if you're going to place the lead in the LV free wall, the electrical impulse will start from the lateral aspect, and it moves from the lateral to the medial aspect. What happens in BIV, it is a mixture of both these two. So where your RV and LV will be pacing simultaneously, or RV lead and LV lead will be pacing simultaneously. So where the electrical impulse will start little inferiorly towards the left side and it moves superiorly. So if you understand this concept, you know how the ECGs in CRT will be looking like. Next slide, please. So this ECG is the one where the native left band branch block is shown, where you can see a white QRS, monophasic R in lead V1, monophasic R in lead V6, and QS morphology in lead V1. So if the QRS is more than 120 milliseconds, you are going to label it as a left band branch block. And once you pace the right ventricle, you'll be producing the similar morphology where you will get a QS complex in lead V1 and monophasic white R in lead 1, as well as in lead V6. So and the precordial leads will be monophasic from V1 to V6 because you're capturing the RV myocardium, the apical area. But if you pace the left ventricle epicardially, so your leads will be in the left lateral basal aspects of the LV free wall. So since it is more basal, your precordial leads will be positive, will be white positive, it will be like a monophasic R from V1 to V6, and the lead 2 will be positive because you are more towards the basal and superior aspect. And you will have again a bizarre QRS which will be wide, but it will be of an RBVB morphology because you are pacing the left ventricle. But what happens if you combine these two together? Like if you are pacing the right ventricle and left ventricle simultaneously, so both these two ECGs will actually club together or fuse together to produce a narrow QRS morphology. So in a CRT ECG, next slide please, there are a few important things which you have to look for whether to confirm whether your both LV and RV leads are capturing simultaneously. Next slide, please. So one thing is that there should be a Q in lead 1 and as well as in lead V6. So this Q or a QR pattern in lead 1 and lead V6 will confirm that your left ventricular lead is capturing, and if you have a narrow QRS, that confirms that your both left ventricular as well as right ventricular leads are simultaneously capturing. See, this QR complex will not be seen in patients with a pure RV apical or septal pacing. So presence of this Q in lead 1 will confirm that there is a LV captured via the coronary sinus. So another important thing which you have to look for is an R wave in lead V1. So this R wave again confirms you that there is a left ventricular capture, and with the QRS duration of very narrow, probably of 130 milliseconds, that again will confirm you that both your RV and LV leads are capturing simultaneously. It's very important to confirm the left ventricular capture during follow-up because many studies have consistently shown that only if you have a BIV pacing percentage of more than 95%, the patient is going to have a symptomatic improvement. Next slide, please. So this was the ECG of the patient whom I've shown in the first slide. So where the baseline ECG is showing a complete left branch block with a QRS duration of probably around 160 to 180 milliseconds. So after placing the leads in the coronary sinus in the posterolateral vein and an RV apical septum, we could get a relatively narrow QRS probably of around 130 milliseconds, and you can very well see that lead 1 is showing a good Q wave and lead AVL is showing a very good Q wave, and lead V1 is showing a good R wave. So this again confirms that you have captured the left ventricle, and since the QRS is relatively narrow as compared to the baseline, you can very well confirm that both your right ventricular apical lead as well as the left ventricular coronary sinus lead is capturing simultaneously to produce a reduction in the narrow QRS. Next slide, please. So remember, our job is not going to be done with this procedure itself, because during follow-up, we have to ensure that the left ventricular capture is being consistently, left ventricle is being consistently captured. Otherwise, at any time during follow-up, the patient is demonstrating loss of left ventricular capture, then again, they'll go back to a class 3 or class 4 status. Next slide, please. So for that, you have to monitor the ECG during every follow-up and look for a Q wave in lead 1 and look for an R wave in lead B1. Next slide, please. So if you see that there is an increase in positivity during follow-up, like in lead V1, if you see that the QRS is predominantly getting positive, and if there is a loss of Q wave during follow-up, that confirm that your LV is not captured for some reason, either maybe because of rise in threshold, which happens with the coronary sinus lead, or it may be even because of a dislodgement of the coronary sinus lead into the right ventricle. So this is very important to monitor the continuous capture of the left ventricle from the coronary sinus lead to get the maximum benefit. Next slide, please. So despite that, we have seen that at least 10 to 20% of the patient with a BiV therapy may not respond adequately to a cardiac resynchronization therapy. So we have a lot of other options available recently to overcome this problem. The typical CRT non-responders, or even patients who are not an ideal candidate for CRT. So now the second part of the session, which is where we are going to discuss about the conduction system pacing. Next slide, please. The concept of conduction system pacing actually evolved because of the chronic complication of the RV pacing. So we know that chronic RV pacing is going to produce an LV dilatation because of desynchronous contraction, and this LV dilatation will be clinically translated as LV dysfunction, frequent heart failure hospitalization, as well as atrial arrhythmias. Next slide, please. To overcome this problem, people have searched for alternative sites. So instead of pacing the RV septum, RV apex, the people have started pacing the RV septum, or even the RV outflow tract, or sometimes LV endocardium. But ultimately, none of the trials have shown a consistent benefit of or superiority of RV apical pacing versus the other conventional, other site of alternative site of pacing. But either it can be in the His bundle, or even it can be in the left bundle branch area. Next slide, please. So let us see the anatomy of the His bundle. So this is the Cox triangle which you read during our anatomy days. So it is actually bordered by the coronary sinus ostium, septal tricuspid leaflet, and tendon of Tarot. So at the apex of the Cox triangle, we have the AV node continuing as an His bundle, and the His bundle will run in the membranous septum. So once it pierces the central fibrous body and enters into the crust of the interventricular septum, it divides into left bundle and right bundle. So from there, we know that left bundle will have two further divisions, left anterior vesicle and posterior vesicle. Right bundle will not have any further divisions. Ultimately, Purkinje fibers will be forming and innervating the ventricular myocardium. So this His bundle, the membranous septum, is the ideal area to target for the His bundle. So this His bundle can be targeted either in the atrioventricular component of the membranous septum. So membranous septum, in fact, has two components. One is the atrioventricular component, which divides the right atrium from the left ventricle, and a ventricular component, which divides the right ventricle from the left ventricle. So you can target the His bundle either in the atrioventricular component or in the ventricular component. But targeting the His bundle in the ventricular component is going to give a good advantage in terms of atrial oversensing, ventricular undersensing, and a capture thresholds. Let us see how it works in patients with a bradyarrhythmia problem and the patients with wide QRS. Next slide, please. So these are the gadgets which commonly used for conduction system pacing. So this procedure is almost similar to doing a dual chamber pacemaker, but for these two important things. One is the sheath, which the currently available sheath in India is a C315 sheath, which has two curvatures. One to facilitate entry into the right ventricle, and another one which the septal curvature, which allows the lead to go septally, and the lead which is nothing but a 4.1 French and MRI compatible 3830 leads. So these two things are very important for doing a conduction system pacing, which allows us to place the lead exactly in the His bundle or at the left bundle area. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. So in His bundle pacing, click one more. Yeah. So in His bundle pacing, so we are going to place the lead in the distal aspect of the His bundle. So I was talking about the membranous septum, this atrioventricular component and the ventricular component. It's preferable to go down into the ventricular component, because when your lead is into the ventricular component, your atrial sensing component will be reduced, so that you will not have any atrial oversensing, and you will have a good ventricular sensing, so that you will have a good R wave amplitude, and your capture threshold will also be very good. So it's always better to go below the tricuspid valve, target the ventricular component of the His bundle to do the His bundle pacing. So another important thing which I would like to highlight here is if you see the his bundle, so it's coming down and it is getting branched into right bundle and left bundle. You can see the color coding of the fibers inside the his bundle. So you can see these yellow fibers, which are actually the his bundle fibers, and goes directly into the right bundle. And you can see the red fibers, which actually goes into the left bundle. So this is what is meant as a longitudinal dissociation, where the his bundle will have a bunch of fibers, which will be predestined for either right bundle or left bundle. So this is very, very important in understanding the mechanism of his bundle pacing in patients with a wide QRS. So here, suppose if you have a problem here, suppose if there is any problem in the yellow fibers, the patient will have a right bundle branch block morphology in the surface ECG, and he will not have a complete heartbeat. Similarly, if you have any partial injury to the his bundle on the left side, where you have the left fibers, red colored fibers, the patient again will have a left bundle branch block and he will not have a complete heartbeat. So this means that any partial injury to the his bundle affecting predominantly one group of fibers, for example, here if it's going to affect the yellow fibers, the patient's surface ECG will be looking like an RBB. Similarly, if it is going to affect the red fibers, the patient's surface ECG is going to be a left bundle branch block. So meaning that you need not have to have an injury of right bundle to have an RBBB morphology in the surface ECG. Similarly, you need not have to have an injury only in the left bundle to have an LBBB pattern in the surface ECG. So even the his bundle injury can produce an RBBB morphology or LBBB morphology. So this is very important while doing an his bundle pacing for patients with a wide QRS. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. 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 Stop. Previous slide, please. So this his bundle pacing technique will be done in the EP lab as similar as to doing a conventional dual chamber pacemaker. The only difference is that we'll be doing along with an EP system, and we'll be placing two catheters from the groin to localize the his bundle. So one catheter, it's actually a diagnostic EP catheter placed across the his bundle, and another catheter will be in the right ventricular apex. This catheter, this quadripolar catheter, which is placed across the his bundle, will give us the his bundle signals. So like TRM sir was discussing in his talk about the his bundle signal. So it will have 3 electrograms. The first one will be the HL electrogram, the second one will be the his bundle electrogram, and the third one will be the ventricular electrogram. So when this quadripolar catheter across the his bundle, we have 3 deflections. One, the HL deflection, the second one will be the sharp H deflection, and third one will be the ventricular deflection. So this will act as an anatomical landmark to localize the his bundle. Similarly, this RB catheter, which is placed at an RB apex, will act as a backup RB pacing in case if the patient develops iatrogenic complete heart failure. Next slide, please. So what you have to do is you have to take the lead, that specialized 3830 lead, and you have to use the sheath because this 3830 lead, this 4.1 French lead has an open helix. You cannot just simply put it into the venous system because it is going to injure the venous system since the helix is exposed. So you have to take the sheath and go into the right ventricle. So place the sheath as close as possible to the his bundle catheter. So we have already an anatomical landmark, a groin catheter, a quadripolar catheter, which is placed across the his bundle region. So all you have to do is take the sheath and place it closer to the his bundle region and just expose the lead out of the sheath and connect it to the this EP system analyzer. See, there are few important things which you have to see here. Since only the tip alone is exposed, your anode will be still within the sheath, so you cannot do a bipolar mapping. So you have to go for a unipolar mapping. So meaning that you have to connect one end to the one tip to the one cable to the tip of the lead, and another cable here you can see the another cable is connected to a patient's body. So this is very important because this bipolar will not give you any further mapping because your anode is still within the sheath. So you have to map in a unipolar fashion. So once you connect it, so either in the EP system or in the program system analyzer, you'll be able to see 3 deflections. The first one is going to be the HL deflection, and the second one is going to be the his bundle deflection, and third one is going to be the ventricular deflection. So here what you have to understand is you have to place the lead in such a way that your HL electrogram should be very small, and you have a big ventricular electrogram and a decent looking his bundle electrogram. So this is very important. This large A as shown in this picture should be avoided because it is going to produce atrial overstretching during follow-up. So you have to have a very small A, probably in the ratio of 1:5 to a ventricular electrogram, and you have to have a decent looking his bundle electrogram. Next slide, please. So once you are sure that the site is appropriate, then you can screw the lead. So once you screw the lead, you have to again pace and look for the pace QRS morphology. Suppose if you are right on the top of the his bundle and you are going to pace the ventricle